Have you ever played the game Would You Rather? Some of you might have recognized that title. Some of you might not. It was a fun game in car rides in our family as we would drive places that took a while, long road trips. We would sometimes, especially as Mia was younger, I can't remember if we did it with Elise and Carrie when they were younger, but we would play Would You Rather. Would you rather walk across hot coals or jump off a cliff into 10 feet of water? Right, and then you have to explain why, right? I mean, I'm just making it up. But you would make up those scenarios, and it would pass the time in the car. But let me ask you this. Would you rather step out into the face of a tornado that is bearing down on your house, or stay inside and hope that the house makes it? Sometimes we're faced with decisions and choices that don't seem all that great in either case, right? And today, as we consider Mother's Day in 2023, we're going to look at a story that is a little bit of a would you rather, but it's also a story of hope, of faith, of extreme courage, from a young woman who's not yet a mother. And so we're actually going to be in Joshua chapter 2 today, and we're going to look at this young woman named Rahab. And so turn with me to Joshua chapter 2. And so just to provide a little bit of background as we dive into the story of Rahab, Rahab was a young woman, and she was living in a city called Jericho. And Jericho is actually a great example to use because there is clear archaeological evidence that Jericho existed. In fact, archaeologists suggest that it existed as far back as 9,000 BC. Very close to the beginning. How they know that, I don't know, by the way. Just going to say that. But that's what they say. So it was very old. And in those first generation settlements in the thousands of BCs ago, it ranged between 300 and 3,000 people. It was built in that area because there were springs of water that were in that area, and it ebbed and flowed, no pun intended, as a town, as a settlement over the ages. And by the time we get to this age, Jericho has become a large city. It has, according to the archaeologists, 2 walls, an inner wall and an outer wall. And the inner wall has ties back to more of those original settlements, and so it's more, contained. And the outer wall has now encompassed the growth of this city, and it is a large, huge wall that surrounds Jericho. It's wide enough and tall enough that whole houses, like apartments, dwellings are in the wall itself. Businesses are potentially being run in the wall itself. And likely it's wide enough that you could run chariots around the top, right? It's a big wall. Jericho is also, it's a Canaanite city, so enemies of the Jewish people. Let me just see in my notes. It's focused, according to history, on the worship of the goddess Ashtaroth, who we just talked about briefly in Bible class today. So she's moon goddess, the goddess of love, goddess of war, and it's a principal place of worship for the goddess Ashtaroth. So that gives us Jericho. Also, interestingly enough, just as archaeological evidence shows, archaeological evidence states that Jericho was destroyed. They say that an earthquake happened somewhere around 1000 BC. Now, biblical history and historians say that the time that the walls came down is actually more about 1400 BC, but who's going to quibble over 400 years? The reality is that data, digging, etc., shows that the walls did come down, that the walls were knocked down by, it looks like, a severe earthquake, and the town was destroyed because they find burnt remnants in this area. So it looks like it was just fully burnt and destroyed after the walls came down. So it's a really great kind of link to the fact of what we're about to read and what happens. And so with that as the background, we're going to start and just read a couple verses, actually just one verse to start with. In Joshua chapter 2, we read, "And Joshua the son of Nun sent out of Shittim 2 men to spy secretly, saying, 'Go view the land, even Jericho.' And they went, and they came into a harlot's house named Rahab, and lodged there." And so just to think about these 2 men first, right? You're spies. And if you're a spy, where would you go and what would you do if you were a spy? And this kind of almost sounds like a movie or a book, but it is real and it's in the Bible. And so we have these 2 men that are sent out as spies. They're probably dressed like everybody in this area, and they're trying to think. They're supposed to search out the area, spy out, see what the area looks like, how many soldiers I've got, where I might have potentially towns or smaller settlements that would be barriers to us coming and taking over. And they're supposed to actually check out Jericho. And as you think about what we're going to read in this story later and about the kind of the reality of the situation, it actually plays out very effectively. These men walk into the town through the walls, likely the outer walls, because of what we're going to read later. So they walk, and along the outer walls are that thick that there's businesses and houses and other things, right, in the wall. And so they stay along the outer wall. Now, if you're a spy and you think you might need to leave quickly or unconventionally, it's probably a great idea to stay in a place on the outside wall, especially one that might have a window or something to look out where I could climb down if I had to in the middle of the night, right? You know, it actually makes a lot of sense. They find a place where they can rent a room to this woman at a place that belongs to this woman, Rahab. And it says she's a harlot. Now, there's not much that you can say about what a harlot is. You can't play it up too much. A harlot is a prostitute. Okay, so we read that Rahab was a prostitute and that they rented rooms or a room in her house. So there's a couple things here. We have to build kind of a story around this because we don't have much data. That's about all that we have. But we do know a few things that we can start to tie together. One is that she had room for rent. 2 is that later on we find that she had enough potential sway or connections that when the king has a question, he doesn't just go storming in. He actually sends somebody to make a command or to ask or to make a statement toward her. So there's also the likelihood now that within this situation that she might be running a bigger business than just having a room. Okay, we're not sure. But she could be running a business. I could talk about what kind of business in detail, but you can put together the word harlot and running a business, right? She might be running a business. We're not sure. But either way, she's on the outside wall, and that's where we're at. Now, I'm going to be clear, if you start digging into this, some people, I don't think they're right, have tried to argue that the word harlot in this case means innkeeper and not a prostitute. I think that there is no biblical evidence to that. I'll just say that, okay? It was kind of interesting as I was doing some reading, finding that. I think people, they don't like the idea that Rahab, as we'll find out later who she is, that the idea that she was a prostitute. And so maybe it's a lot nicer to call her an innkeeper. Everything that we can tell from what the Bible says is that she was either a prostitute or she was running a brothel. But let's consider Rahab for a minute. It might be an odd person. She might be an odd person to have for a Mother's Day sermon at first glance. But as we dig into this, we see a really powerful person here and a story here. So if you think about Rahab, Rahab was probably born extremely poor. If you do your history and you think about and understand the civilizations of that time, right? To be in the job that she was, her family was poor. She was poor. And unlike the present day, when you're born poor, you don't have welfare. You don't have food stamps. You're not going to have Medicare or Medicaid. You're on your own. And you either live or die. No two ways about it. And if she was born poor and her family was poor, somehow you need to survive. And so this young lady has the wherewithal to survive. Right? She's going to find a way to make money to survive. We also see that she cares about her family. She cares about her mom and dad, and she cares about her brothers and sisters. We don't get any evidence that she's married, so she's likely very young. She cares about her family. We see a young lady who is smart, perceptive, aware, and thinking as we look into this story. She's paying attention to what's going on. And so, starting with her, she might have been the oldest of the children. We don't know. But she cares about her parents. So we get a sense from just even that her parents cared for her, that they loved her, and that she loved them. It wasn't like she was born and they abandoned her. She knew who her mom and dad were. And we can sense that she's poor because if her dad would have had money, she probably wouldn't have been a prostitute. Okay? And so by putting the pieces together, there's a strong likelihood she's very poor, she's young, and she's figuring out how to make it the best that she can in a society that's really not set up to help you make it. So she's built a business. Maybe not a big business, maybe a big business. But she has a business that's enough that she can afford to buy a house or a dwelling. She's not living on the streets. She's not renting. From what we can tell, she has a home, and that home is on the outside wall, and that home is high enough on the outside wall where she has a window that they'll let her have on the outside wall. So she gets daylight, she gets fresh air, and it's high enough where the city doesn't feel like it's a danger to have that window, right? So we can predict that it's high up. We also find out later she lets the spies down by a rope from that window. So it's high enough up where you need a rope to get down. So she is running a business where she can afford to buy a dwelling that's on the outer wall, that's high enough on that outer wall, that she can have a window. And so, two people walk in. Two men, and they ask to rent a room. And she rents them a room, according to the first verse. We don't know if she recognized that these were foreigners yet, or if she didn't care. But likely, she might have recognized that maybe their accent's a little different, or they're not from around here. For them, this might have been a good place to be inconspicuous, to get some information, to be able to escape quickly, to get a lay of the land without having to go too far into the middle of town where you can't get out. And so they're trying to dig for information, and perhaps she's trying to just listen and dig for information here too, as two people she might not recognize have come into her place and are renting a space. And then we read verse 2 that she wasn't the only one that might have recognized that there were some strangers here that stepped into town. And in verse 2 we read, "And it was told the king of Jericho, saying, Behold, there came in men," let me read that again. "Behold, there came men in hither tonight of the children of Israel to search out the country." And so he says, hey, somebody noticed that some guys walked into town. And they don't look like they're from here. Sounds like they're foreigners. Maybe their accents give them away. Maybe their clothes are giving them away. Maybe they're a little bit too muscular. Who knows, right? We don't know. But there's enough going on that somebody recognized that these men were different. And so they tell the king. And whoever it was also noticed where they went. Because in verse 3, and the king of Jericho sent unto Rahab, saying, Bring forth the men that are come to thee, which are entered into thine house, for they come to search out all the country. And so, as we think about the details, what's interesting about this now is that this king doesn't just send soldiers, right? He has seen that, or had heard that these two men entered the house of Rahab. Somebody saw them because he's sending a note to her. But soldiers don't just go running into Rahab's house. Maybe there's too many well-connected people that use the house. But he sends a note to Rahab. Hey, we have spies that have come in. They're going to they want to destroy the city. They want to take over. Send them out. Send them to me, right? How does he say it? Bring forth the men that are come to thee, for they are come to search out all the country. We've got spies in our midst. So, even just from that note, Rahab is respected enough that she gets a note. She doesn't get soldiers breaking down her door. Now, what do you do in that situation? What do you do if you're Rahab? I mean, think about it for a minute. What would you do? Okay, you've worked your whole young life to eke out a living, scraping, clawing, to make enough money for yourself, to potentially protect and take care of your family. You've finally gotten to a point in life where you're stable, as stable as you might consider it in that time and in that period, right? You might have enough respect from city government that politically, you're just starting to be connected. You're on the outside looking in, but the government is sending you notes rather than breaking down your doors. And if you take these spies and you turn them over, there's the potential that you could suddenly be on the inside looking out, right? You could be that much better connected within your society, within your culture, and you would just be making another move up the ladder in society. Right? That's what she got. She has to figure. She gets this note saying, turn over those spies that are dwelling with you. And every logical move, every thought that you can lay out logically says, turn them over. But she doesn't. She doesn't. And the woman took the two men and hid them. Right? The woman hides those two men. And she lies about it. Now, I think, just to jump all the way to the conclusion, if you look in Hebrews and in James in the New Testament, Rahab is listed as one of the heroes of faith in Hebrews chapter 11, right? Which kind of, on some level, blows your mind that this woman that we're describing right here, right now, who is a prostitute, who is hiding men and lying about it, is now listed as a hero of faith in the New Testament in Hebrews. But if we think about it just for a minute and break this down as to the state of mind that she's in, the state of her life in this moment, and what she knows and what she doesn't know, she knows that she's got a couple spies in her midst, in her renting a room. She knows that if she turns them in, she's either going to get a reward, or she's going to get some political clout, or she's going to be able to grow her business, or she's going to be left alone even more as she runs her business. And it's going to be better for her family, even though that business is not what we would consider appropriate. She also knows that there's a tornado coming. And that tornado's upwards of 1 million strong. And that so far, nothing has been able to stand in the path of that tornado. And that tornado, just to be clear, is not a whirlwind. It's the people of Israel coming to inhabit the land that has been promised to them by their God, Jehovah. So would you rather step out into the tornado, or close those doors and lock them down and hope the walls of your house stand strong? And so she, in this moment, because she probably doesn't have a lot of time, right? In this moment, has to make a decision. Risk it? Risk it? Or follow the logical path? And if I risk it, I turn my back on my society. I turn my back on my culture. I could be killed, hung, beheaded, pick your poison, for aiding the enemy. So I'm turning my back on my society, my culture. I'm risking my life. I'm turning my back on my goddess, my gods, as far as I know them. I'm turning my back or giving up on my friends. And I'm putting my family's life on the line. And all of that clawing and working to set up a livelihood for myself, if that's there, is also being thrown out, right? So this young woman is risking everything. She's risking everything in this moment. In Luke 12, Jesus says, and I'm going to paraphrase it, but in Luke 12, verse 52, verse 53, Jesus, and it's mentioned multiple times in the New Testament as Jesus talks about it, he talks about the fact that when he comes, he's come to set parents against their children, children against their parents. He's come to divide households in half. He's come to call people who are going to be forced to make tough decisions in that moment in their lives. And those tough decisions are going to be, do I follow Jesus, or do I follow the logical course that makes sense, that's been laid out before me my whole life, that I've worked to attain and get to my whole life? Or do I follow Jesus? And Rahab in this moment is being faced with that same choice. And so she says, there came men unto me, but I wist not whence they were. And it came to pass about the time of the shutting of the gate, when it was dark, that the men went out. Whither the men went, I wot not, I don't know. Pursue after them quickly, for you shall overtake them. But she had brought them up to the roof of the house and hid them with the stalks of flax, which she laid in order upon the roof. And the men pursued after them the way to Jordan unto the fords. And as soon as they which pursued them were gone, they shut the gate. And so when I say that we have a young woman who's astute and perceptive and aware and quick and thinking, we see it in action, right? We see why Rahab has gotten to the point where she's gotten, even as a young woman potentially, is that in the face of danger, of guilt, of potential looking like she's guilty, of trying to fumble with her words, of trying to figure out how to act and stumble, right? She is quick. And so she quickly tells the men who have come that they were here. She didn't lie about that. She wouldn't say, no, they never showed up, because that would automatically go right up against face-to-face against somebody who says, no, they did go there, right? And so she'd be called out. No, she says, oh, yeah, they were here. They were here. I didn't recognize them. I didn't know who they were. So maybe that means she did. But as it got dark, they left. Now, she didn't say in the middle of the day they left, or bright early in the morning they left, right, when their faces would be very visible and people could really be aware that these two guys didn't actually leave. No. When it was dark and when it was dusk and as the sun was setting, just before the gates were supposed to be closed, these two men left. It would have been really hard for anybody who was watching to tell, was she lying? Did these two men really leave, or was it two other men that left, right? So you can sense, you can get the glimpse into this young woman that there's a quickness and a sharpness, I would say wisdom, as she knows it, worldly wisdom, but she's perceptive. She's perceptive. And she knows how to answer. She's quick-witted. And before they were laid down, she came up unto them upon the roof, those that she hid, the two men, as she had hid them and covered them with reeds. Before she hid them, she said unto the men, and I want you to listen to this or follow along. This is verse 9 in Joshua chapter 2. And she said unto the men, I know that the Lord hath given you the land, and that your terror is fallen upon us, and that all the inhabitants of the land faint because of you. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did unto the two kings of the Amorites, which were on the other side of Jordan, Sihon and Og, whom ye utterly destroyed. And as soon as we heard these things, our hearts did melt, neither did there remain any more courage in any man because of you. For the Lord your God, he is God in heaven above and in earth beneath. Now therefore, I pray you, swear unto me by the Lord, since I have showed you kindness, that you will also show kindness unto my father's house, and give me a true token, and that you will save alive my father and my mother and my brethren, my brothers and my sisters, and all that they have, and deliver our lives from death. And so we have this young woman who risks it all. She makes this choice in the spur of the moment, having to make a decision immediately. And she makes the choice. And so what we see here, okay, and this is something for all of us to consider. What we see here is there is evidence of truth. She has seen the evidence as she testifies, as she proclaims it to these men. She has seen the evidence, and she has seen it to be true. And because the evidence, if you want to say, demanded a verdict, and the verdict was that it was true, it was accurate, she is acting on it. And so in this statement, we see she recognizes truth. She recognizes God for who he is. She recognizes his authority above all other gods. And she believes that he is able and willing to save. And she throws herself before his people, begging for mercy. Because at this point, She's done. She's all in. There's no turning back. What's she going to do? Oh, I made a mistake. They actually didn't leave. They were hiding up on my roof. No, she can't do that. She's in. And now she's throwing herself at their mercy, saying, listen, I saved you, and I believe that you will win because the Lord your God, he is God. And because I have risked my life for you to save you, you have to promise that you will save me and my family. What's also powerful about this moment is that we recognize that God does take us where we are. She had an imperfect understanding of God. She didn't understand all the details of what was expected, but she recognized him for who he was, and she fell upon his begging for his mercy, right? And today, if you're in a state where maybe you don't know God fully, maybe you don't understand fully, and maybe you scratch your head and like, I'm not sure, what am I supposed to do? Don't let that stop you. Take the leap. Take it one step at a time. And you take the leap, and God will take care of it. He doesn't expect you to know everything. He doesn't expect you to be perfect. He just expects you to believe and to risk it all, to give it all up, just like Rahab did. She threw it all away to save herself and her family. Are you willing to throw it all away to save yourself? You know, in Romans chapter 1, we talk about those that recognized God and because of creation, and yet chose not to worship God, but chose to worship creation itself. And the Apostle Paul condemns those that claim that they have a way out and an escape because they weren't given the same information as the Jewish people. And Paul condemns them and says, no, you are without excuse, those of you that claim this, because God is visible through creation itself. And if you choose to worship the creation instead of the Creator, you are condemned. Rahab recognized the Creator and chose to throw away the worship of creation, to surrender to the Creator. And the men answered her in verse 14, our life for yours. If you utter not this our business, if you promise, if you don't talk about this, our life for yours. And it shall be when the Lord hath given us the land that we will deal kindly and truly with thee. And so she lets them out the window. We're going to kind of go ahead a little bit here. She lets them down by a cord through the window, for her house was upon the town wall in verse 15, and she dwelt upon the wall. There you go. Right? And she says unto them, get up to the mountains, lest the pursuers find you, and hide yourself there 3 days, and then they'll be back. And the men said unto her, we will be blameless jump into verse 17. Of this thine oath which thou hast made us swear. They're saying, we will follow our side of it, right? You will not be able to blame us for not following it. Behold, when we come into the land, thou shalt bind this line of scarlet thread in the window, which thou didst let us down by, and thou shalt bring thy father and thy mother and thy brethren and all thy father's household home unto thee. And it shall be that whosoever shall go out of the doors of this house into the street, his blood shall be upon his head. For we will be guiltless. And whosoever shall be with thee in the house, his blood shall be on our head. All right, so we could do just a whole message on the scarlet thread that's tied on her window. But if you think about the scarlet thread that's tied her to her window, you can actually, it's an analogy, it's a symbol, it's a metaphor, and so it's real, but at the same time, it's a symbol and it's an analogy and it's a metaphor of what happened at the Passover when the angel of death passed over the houses that the Jewish people dwelt, right? They put blood on the doorpost and they stayed inside, and it's not verbatim, but the text is so similar about if the people left the house, the firstborn would die. If they stayed in the house, they would be protected. And these spies say, tie the scarlet thread to your window, aka the blood on the doorpost, and if your family stays in the house, they will be saved. We will not kill them, but if they leave, anybody that leaves, they will be killed. And this is also now a foreshadow. I mean, it's not a foreshadowing, it's the precursor to, but it's a symbol. And if you look forward, I guess it is a foreshadowing. I said that wrong. It is a foreshadowing of Jesus' sacrifice. Of Jesus' sacrifice and his crucifixion and his shed blood. And hanging our hope on him rather than on ourselves. It's such a powerful symbol of redemption in that moment. And so when you fast forward, when we look at Hebrews 11:31, by faith the harlot Rahab perished not with them that believed not when she had received the spies with peace. And you ask, well, how is she in this? How is she in Hebrews 11 with the other heroes of faith when she lied? You know, she lied because she didn't know any better. But she was also a prostitute at that moment because she didn't know any better. But she saw God, she believed God, and she trusted God, and she threw everything away to follow God. But if we just stop the story here, we don't get the end of the story. Because you see, she is saved. She does throw all this away. But we do read in Joshua 6, I'm going to just jump to the end here in verse 25. And Joshua saved Rahab the harlot alive, and her father's household, and all that she had, and she dwelleth in Israel even today, because she hid the messengers which Joshua sent to spy out Jericho. So this young woman was saved alive with her whole household. And she, as Joshua is being written, her family lives to this day with the people of Israel. She converted to Judaism. She became Jewish. She lived with the people. And the story doesn't even end there. Because if you know your Bible history, it gets better. You see, she and her family, they become like the best believers. And she ends up marrying a man. A Jewish man, and they have a child. Anybody remember what his name was? Boaz. And if Boaz is starting to tickle your memory here, well, if you turn to the book of Ruth, Boaz is the man that marries Ruth. And okay, you're like, if you know your Bible history now, things start to add up. But if you don't know your Bible history, let's stop for a minute at Ruth for a second. Because if you look in Ruth, and the way Boaz is described, is he's described as an upright and righteous man. And if you look at Ruth and you look at how Boaz acts, Boaz is a man who has embraced the spirit of the law and not the letter of the law. And so he is a true, faithful follower of the God Jehovah. Because when Ruth is out gleaning the fields, like she's trying to get just a little bit of food that's left, The spirit of the law is you're supposed to have enough for them to be able to eat. So somebody could go and glean the fields and grab what's left and be able to eat. The letter of the law would be just leave very little, absolutely nothing. Whatever's left that you didn't able to pick, they get the rest. And we see Boaz following the spirit of the law because he leaves extra for her. And he knows the law, and he follows the law all through Ruth, and he ends up marrying Ruth. And so what we see about Rahab is that she was a mother. And she was a good mother. And she taught her son well. And he grew up. He grew up to be an upright and righteous man. And Boaz had some amazing descendants. King David, and later, even the Messiah comes from that lineage. And so to us, do we recognize the truth in the evidence that's before us? Are we willing to take the leap of faith, to follow God, to trust him to protect us rather than to try to save ourselves? Are we willing to submit to him and allow him to change us? Are we willing to risk it for the hope that's in Jesus Christ? You know, we all have to look in the mirror and consider the opportunity and the potential that lies within us. Believers, brothers and sisters, that same opportunity and that same potential that was in Rahab is in you and me. If you don't know Jesus Christ and you haven't surrendered and you haven't given him your heart and soul, are you willing to take the leap of faith? Become the next Rahab.